Welcome everyone. Myself, Dr. Praveen Kumar Pathak, an Associate Professor in the Department of Geography at Jamia Millia Islamia. I am today assisted by Ms. Manisha Sharma. She is expert in sign language. So today I am going to discuss with all of you an important topic related to migration theories. We all know that migration is an important component of population change in any region, and it has long-lasting implications related to development of any area. So therefore, it is important for us to understand the basic framework and various factors that might help us to explain the process of migration. Studies of migration is interdisciplinary in nature. Social scientists from different fields and branches, including geographers, demographers, sociologists, economists, anthropologists, have been investigating the motivations and factors responsible for migration. And today I am going to focus upon some of the fundamental theories and perspective related to migration at different geographical scales. So the most important premise to understand migration was proposed by E.G. Revenstein back in the year 1885. Revenstein basically hailed from United Kingdom. So his major work was focused upon understanding various factors that were responsible for migration decision in the United Kingdom using census data of UK 1881. So he was actually trying to propose salient characteristics and hypotheses that might help to understand migration. And therefore he has given few principles and rules of migrations which are a stepping stone for social scientists to understand migration. So if you look at Revenstein's postulate, the few of them include: first is most migration is over a short distance, and this is very much true in contemporary society. Of course, his work was dated back in 1880s. However, it is true in the present context as well. Majority of the migration tends to be short distance only. So if you take case of India, if you compare the migration within Indian context using census data even today, we observe that the predominant stream of migration in India happens to be rural to rural. So essentially, because people often migrate shorter distance, very rarely we find people making large distance migration. So therefore migration essentially has been shown and observed to be a process predominantly involving short distance mobility or migration. Second important proposition of Revenstein's was that migration occurs in steps. So the idea is that the process of migration is a stepwise process. People tend to move from remote districts or villages to relatively large villages in a given district. And with improvement in their technological know-how, skill set, with newer opportunity they come to learn about in the nearby towns, they move further. So gradually this process of migration unfolds and people tend to move from smaller villages, towns and cities to bigger cities and metropolitan cities or the national capitals. So in this way we may see that migration is a stepwise process. So this was pretty much based on the empirical findings that Revenstein analyzed in the UK's context in 1880s, and in many parts of the world we still observe that this is true. Even in Indian context, if you look at the census data, we observe that a lot of people generally tend to move to smaller cities and towns before making their final jump to mega cities or national capitals. Third important observation that Revenstein proposed was long range migrants usually move to urban areas. So if you look at the process of migration, as I just noted, that largely the migration is a short distance migration, and very few cases we observe migrations to be usually long distance migration usually happens to be a urban center or mega cities. So for instance, people who have better qualification, education and skill sets, they look for opportunity to move for improving their material circumstances, and hence they tend to move to long distances. So therefore, it's important for us to understand what are the factors which are underpinning these vital decisions, why certain people tend to move to long distance migration versus certain people, in fact large proportion of people, rather choosing to only move for a shorter distance. So often it is seen that because of the attraction which is given by large cities of business, commerce, industry, entertainment, education, skills, people are attracted to these large cities and towns, and however these long distance migrants happens to be relatively smaller in number. Next proposition by Revenstein is related to the fact that each migration produces a movement in the opposite direction. So if you think about migration, we have two important points. First is the point of origin, and second is the point of destination. So the point of origin is a place from where an individual decides to move out because of an array of factors, which might include economic compulsions, social circumstances, environmental stress. This might include, as today we are grappling with the problem of climate change, so often it is seen that the groundwater levels are reducing. The pattern of climate is becoming more variable and erratic. The frequencies of rainfall has become very irregular. The monsoon season has become weak. So often in developing nations context, we have seen that a lot of people have to move out because of the impact of climate change. So along with these economic, social and climatic factors, often it is also seen that because of political factors or because of conflicts in societies or between neighbor countries, people have to move out. So these are set of factors which are working at the place of origin. And if you talk about the place of destination, the potential migrant doesn't have a perfect idea, but has some imperfect information about the set of potential opportunities and challenges. However, these potential migrants, they weigh between possible benefits both at the place of origin and also at the place of destination. And as it is, nobody is rationally perfect. So it may be assumed that depending upon individuals' ability to access information, he or she makes a decision whether to move out to the potential place of destination or not. And so therefore we have, if you look at the tendency of the process of migration, for example, even in the Indian context, there are a lot of migration streams happening from eastern part of India to the western part of India. People are moving out from economically lagging behind states such as Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, Jharkhand, West Bengal, Assam, and moving to relatively better performing states in the western part of the country, including Gujarat, Maharashtra, even south in Kerala and Tamil Nadu. And part of the reason is, of course, that people find lot of difference in the wage rates at their place of origin and the place of destination. So therefore, weighing between these potential benefits and the cost associated between these 2 points, we observe that migration, the process of migration operates in between point of origin and point of destination. So when there is a movement from point of origin to the point of destination, there is a sense of vacuum which is created at the place of origin. Why it is created? Because migration is a selective process, and typically young people, and in developing countries context they are men, tend to move out from countryside, rural areas to the urban centers, so which creates a lack of labor force at the place of origin. So in order to compensate for this gap, we observe that people from the surrounding places, from the remote districts, tend to move towards the places from where migration has taken place. So people moving from origin to destination. So therefore each migration produces a movement in the opposite direction. Another important postulate of Revenstein's was that rural dwellers are more migratory than urban dwellers, and this is an important point to understand. He further says that the natives of towns are less migratory than those of rural areas, and there are various reasons why it is the case. We often note that if you look at the composition of people, those who are living in the rural areas, so often these people are engaged in agricultural and allied activities, where largely in global south the production is done for self-consumption. Farming is largely subsistence farming. Majority of farmers happen to be marginal farmers, and so therefore their economic circumstances are not well to do. So because of the challenges related due to livelihood conditions, the rural dwellers look for better opportunities, and as with the advent of globalization, greater industrialization and climate change, it has been seen that there is an increasing risk of livelihood in the rural areas, and so therefore rural dwellers often look for better circumstances to improve their life condition and their family condition, and hence they seek better opportunities and tend to move. On the other hand, urban dwellers happens to be relatively better off in their material circumstances. They have diversified skill sets, they are better qualified and educated, and their resilience is higher as compared to the rural areas. So therefore we observe that rural dwellers predominate in the process of migration as compared to the urban dwellers. Next important point is, according to Revenstein's perspective, that within own country females are more migratory than males, but males are more migratory over long distances. So this is an observation by Revenstein with regard to the United Kingdom position. But even if you see in today's time, we observe that, let's take the case of India. Majority of the migration among females happens to be short distance migration. So basically the idea is that migration is very internal within the country, and predominantly if you look at the census data, it suggests that women's migration is largely due to marriage related factors. So in Indian context, if you look at marriage patterns, so often these marriages happen in nearby places, short distance migration. However, in recent decades, with greater efforts being made by society and governments from both ends, we observe that there is an increasing tendency for women folks to move towards long distance, and among various reasons is of course that they are seeking better education opportunities, and they are also seeking better employment opportunities. However, if you compare long distance migration, either within country or international migration, the data at the global level and also in India shows that predominantly men folk dominate the long distance migration, and therefore it's clear gender differences in terms of the migration by distance between male and female. So female are more migratory than males within UK as per the UK data of 1880 census, but males more frequently venturing beyond UK. And if you compare in several other contexts, even today, it's largely holding true. Further, Revenstein argued that most migrants are adults. So as I said, that migration is a selective process, and when I say selective, the idea is that it is due to age and sex composition of population. Let's take one important example. The decision of migration is a complex decision. If a person is born at a place of origin, he or she has large time that he or she has spent at the place of birth. So he or she has got greater acquaintance, greater connection, both emotional and material. So with this background, it is very difficult for people to choose to move out from native places. And so therefore, when people decide actually to move out, the motivation has to be very strong. So normally when people complete their education and they grow old enough to look for better livelihood opportunities, that time they enter into the age group of adulthood, when if opportunities are not commensurate with their skill set or their aspirations happens to be something which is not being, the possibility of them being met at the place of origin is less, then these adult, whether they are male or female, they choose to make a migratory decision. And hence we observe that migration is largely observed among adults. But there are also other group of people who tend to move with these adults. So for example, if a male is moving out from a rural area to an urban center for a better livelihood opportunity, along with this male, you also have their families, which include young children, wife, sometimes older parents, so who may not be necessarily willing to migrate, but because the son is moving, so the parents, the wife and the kids are also moving along with the adult. So therefore, this is a very complicated process if one has to understand that how this migration actually unfolds. So largely, but we see globally that migration typically happens in the adulthood, where people look for better educational skill set and livelihood opportunities, making an important decision in their life to move out from native places, which is probably one of the most difficult decisions to make in the life. Probably they never know whether they will be able to, or they will get an opportunity to make a comeback or not. Next important point is the large town grow more by migration than by natural increase. So if you look at global process of urbanization, the evidences suggest that majority of these mega cities have grown largely due to the process of migration, movement of people from rural areas to these urban centers, because of these centers having the magnet of opportunities for people from all part of the country and from all part of the world. And so therefore the population growth or the increase in the size of the city's population is largely due to the movement of people into the cities rather than due to natural increase of population. Of course, natural increase does play an important role, but if you make a comparison, it may be seen that migration plays relatively greater role as compared to the natural increase of population. And therefore, there are ample examples if you take the case of global south today. For example, cities like Delhi, Mumbai, Kolkata, Chennai, other part of the global south, look at Dhaka and many other cities in the Beijing, in the South Asia, we find that most of these cities are growing because of rapid in-migration of people from the countryside to the city center, largely for making a good life for themselves and a good life for their family members. Furthermore, if you look at the next important postulate by Revenstein, he argues that migration increases with economic development, which is, so basically we all know that if you look at the history of human civilization, where majority of us were living in a life of tribal society, and gradually with agricultural development, industrial development, specialization of livelihood, and skill sets, people started to move from rural areas to urban areas. Why? Because the nature of the economy, the structure of the economy started to change from agrarian to industrial economy, and there were greater opportunities, greater jobs which were available in the urban centers. So as industrialization was happening along with the process of development, people realized that rural life or village life was not able to provide enough opportunities for survival of the population living in the rural areas. And so therefore, with the process of development, with the new technology, science coming up, greater opportunities started opening up in the urban areas. And so therefore, people started to move from rural to the urban areas. And with globalization, as the economic borders between countries became more interconnected, the process of economic development started taking place at a greater scale, at a greater speed. So today, if somebody is educated and trained in, suppose, Chennai or in Varanasi or in Guwahati, and he or she is able to acquire skill set which is comparable at the global level, then he or she can get very good employment opportunities abroad, and skills which matches to the top bureaucrats or top business person in any part of the world. So therefore, the process of economic development is actually shaping the process of migration in a great way. And today, this is an important point to remember, that how migratory decisions are being shaped by the economic development.